The fire station was alive with the usual morning buzz. The sun had just risen, painting the sky with soft orange light, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air. Firefighters moved in and out of the garage, some checking the hoses, others polishing the bright red engines that gleamed under the morning light. The place was always busy because even on a quiet day, emergencies could happen at any second. In the middle of all this stood Chief Reynolds, tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform neat and his boots polished to a shine. He had been a firefighter for more than 20 years, and his experience gave him authority. The younger men respected him, but they also feared his sharp tongue. Chief Reynolds had a habit of making jokes that weren't always kind. He thought it kept his team tough and ready, but often his words left a sting. He paced across the garage floor sipping his coffee, shouting orders in between quick jokes. "Harris, that helmet looks like it's been through a war," he teased. "Do you sleep with it on your head?" The others laughed. Harris forced a grin. He didn't want to upset the chief, so he joined in the laughter. This was how mornings usually went at the station. A mix of hard work and sarcastic humor. Reynolds believed humor kept the team sharp, but his humor was often at someone else's expense. Still, he had earned his position by facing danger head-on, rushing into burning buildings and saving lives. That record made people forgive his rough personality. He was proud of his role, proud of being the man everyone turned to when disaster struck. That pride showed in every step he took, in the way his voice carried, and in how he stood with his hands on his hips, surveying his crew like a general before battle. The station walls carried the smell of smoke and oil. The floor was clean but worn down from years of boots rushing across it. The big fire engines stood ready, hoses coiled neatly, ladders secured and emergency kits packed. The morning light poured in through the wide garage doors, bouncing off the metal and glass. It was a place of discipline but also of habit. The firefighters were like a family, used to each other's moods, jokes, and silences. Chief Reynolds took another sip of coffee and cracked a grin. He always felt the mornings belonged to him. The men were half awake, not yet fully alert, and that gave him a chance to remind them who was in charge. He cracked another joke at a rookie who had forgotten to tuck in his shirt. "What is this, a fashion show? Maybe you're waiting for a camera crew." The rookie blushed as the others laughed. Reynolds enjoyed the control, the way his words could set the tone of the day. In truth, beneath the confident surface, the chief was a man who feared losing respect. He carried the weight of leadership and often confused fear with respect. He thought if he teased the men, they would work harder, but he rarely considered how much those words hurt. This morning was no different, he carried on, acting as though nothing could shake his authority. The firefighters had learned to live with his attitude. They joked among themselves when he wasn't around, sharing smiles and quiet grumbles. Still, when the alarm bell rang, they all trusted him to lead them. They knew he was brave, and they knew he cared in his own way. The problem was he showed that care through sarcasm instead of kindness. The smell of breakfast drifted in from the small kitchen at the back of the station. Someone had fried eggs and bacon, and the scent mixed with the smell of diesel fuel. It was a strange combination, but it was the smell of their daily lives. One firefighter set down his plate and joined the others polishing the truck. Reynolds nodded approvingly. He liked to see them working even when they were tired. He clapped his hands loudly, the sound echoing through the wide space. "All right, ladies, let's keep those trucks shining. Emergencies don't wait for lazy hands." His voice was half serious, half joking. The crew chuckled, though a few sighed quietly. They knew the chief's voice would carry on like this all morning, until something interrupted the routine. The clock ticked on the wall, steady and calm. Outside, the town was waking up. Children walking to school, shops unlocking their doors, cars starting, but inside the fire station, it was a world of its own, a world where discipline, humor, and the shadow of danger lived side by side. Chief Reynolds adjusted his belt and looked around proudly. He believed he had everything under control. The morning felt ordinary, the kind of ordinary that firefighters almost welcomed. It meant no fire, no accident, no tragedy, just another morning to polish trucks, clean gear, and drink coffee. For Reynolds, it was another chance to show his authority, to prove he was the man in charge. But life has a way of changing in unexpected moments. The laughter, the sarcasm, the smell of coffee and fuel, all of it was about to be interrupted at that very moment. None of them knew that a stranger was about to walk through the doors, someone who would quietly shift the balance of the morning, someone who would test not their strength or their bravery, but their respect and humility. The big doors of the fire station were open that morning, letting in the warm air and the sound of traffic passing by. Firefighters were still busy with their routines, polishing, checking, and preparing, when suddenly a man appeared at the entrance. He walked in slowly, his steps quiet, almost hesitant. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't carrying any tools, and at first glance, he didn't look like anyone important. He had on simple jeans, a dark jacket, and boots that looked well-worn. His hair was a little messy, not styled like someone going to an office or an event. His face carried a calm expression, but there was something shy about the way he moved, like he didn't want to disturb anyone. He paused near the trucks, his eyes scanning every detail, the polished ladders, the rolled hoses, the gleaming red paint. It was as if he was taking in everything with deep respect. The firefighters noticed him right away. Some slowed their work, glancing curiously. Who was this man? He didn't look like a tourist, but he also didn't seem like someone official. He wasn't carrying papers or a camera. He simply stood there watching, his hands tucked loosely in his jacket pockets. His calmness felt unusual, especially in a place where energy and noise never stopped. Chief Reynolds noticed too. He frowned, tilting his head. He wasn't a man who liked surprises, especially in his station. The chief prided himself on order and discipline, and a stranger walking in without introduction immediately bothered him. His voice rang out louder than it needed to. "Can I help you?" The question carried more suspicion than kindness, and everyone could feel it. The man didn't flinch. He gave a small nod, his voice quiet but clear. "I was just looking," he said. His tone was gentle, almost humble, like someone asking for permission rather than demanding it. He stepped a little closer, his eyes still fixed on the engines. "These trucks are beautiful. You all do important work. I've always admired firefighters." Some of the younger firefighters exchanged quick glances. The stranger's words were polite, respectful even. But the chief's sharp eyes narrowed. Reynolds crossed his arms over his chest. His instinct was to judge quickly, and from the stranger's simple clothes and quiet manner, he assumed this was just another curious passerby, someone with too much time on his hands. The man walked closer to one of the engines, his eyes wide with genuine wonder. He bent slightly to look at the polished metal, at the tools arranged with precision. "It's incredible," he whispered, almost to himself. "Every piece of this has a purpose." His respect was obvious. He wasn't mocking, he wasn't wasting time. He was simply appreciating what he saw. Yet to Chief Reynolds it felt like an intrusion. His pride in the station was mixed with suspicion. Why would a stranger walk in uninvited? Why speak in such a soft, almost timid way? In the chief's world, respect was shown through toughness, through loud voices and strong backs. A quiet, humble man didn't fit into that world easily. "Tourist?" Reynolds asked, his tone mocking now. "Looking for a picture? We don't give out free rides." His words earned a few chuckles from the crew, though their laughter was uneasy. They weren't sure if it was fair to laugh at someone who hadn't done anything wrong. The man didn't argue, he didn't snap back or defend himself. Instead, he gave the chief a small, polite smile. "No," he said softly, "I just wanted to see. I've always respected what you all do." His voice carried sincerity, so much that a few firefighters felt a twinge of guilt for laughing. There was something unusual about him, something in the way he stood so calmly while being teased, something in his eyes when he's steady, kind, almost sad, that made a couple of the men stop and wonder. He wasn't like most strangers who wandered in out of curiosity. There was a weight to his silence, a dignity in his posture. But Chief Reynolds didn't notice. His focus was on control, on making sure no one thought he was being too soft. He let out another mocking laugh, shaking his head as if the stranger were nothing but a distraction. To him, this was just another man wasting time. The garage, usually filled with the sound of tools and chatter, grew strangely quiet. The younger men were curious now. They studied the stranger more carefully, watching his every move, the way he walked slowly, the way he touched nothing, the way his eyes carried a kind of quiet gratitude. It didn't add up. Something about him was different. The man stayed close to the engines, moving slowly. His expression never changed from quiet admiration. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply appreciating what he saw. Yet to Chief Reynolds it felt like an intrusion. His pride in the station was mixed with suspicion. Why would a stranger walk in uninvited? Why speak in such a soft, almost timid way? In the chief's world, respect was shown through toughness, through loud voices and strong backs. A quiet, humble man didn't fit into that world easily. Tourist, Reynolds asked, his tone mocking now. Looking for a picture? We don't give out free rides. His words earned a few chuckles from the crew, though their laughter was uneasy. They weren't sure if it was fair to laugh at someone who hadn't done anything wrong. The man didn't argue. He didn't snap back or defend himself. Instead, he gave the chief a small, polite smile. No, he said softly. I just wanted to see. I've always respected what you all do. His voice carried sincerity, so much that a few firefighters felt a twinge of guilt for laughing. There was something unusual about him. Something in the way he stood so calmly while being teased. Something in his eyes, steady, kind, almost sad, that made a couple of the men stop and wonder. He wasn't like most strangers who wandered in out of curiosity. There was a weight to his silence, a dignity in his posture. But Chief Reynolds didn't notice. His focus was on control, on making sure no one thought he was being too soft. He let out another mocking laugh, shaking his head as if the stranger were nothing but a distraction. To him, this was just another man wasting time. The garage, usually filled with the sound of tools and chatter, grew strangely quiet. The younger men were curious now. They studied the stranger more carefully, watching his every move, the way he walked slowly, the way he touched nothing, the way his eyes carried a kind of quiet gratitude. It didn't add up. Something about him was different. The man stayed close to the engines, moving slowly. His expression never changed from quiet admiration. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply there, present in the moment, looking at the firehouse as if it was a place of honor. His humility was so clear that even without saying much, he seemed to carry respect like a badge still. Chief Reynolds stood with his arms crossed, his judgment already made. He saw only a stranger in plain clothes, not worth his time, not worth his respect. He failed to notice that the crew was growing restless, whispering quietly among themselves, glancing at the man, then at each other. Something was slowly dawning on them, though the chief was blind to it, and so the moment stretched on. A quiet man with messy hair and simple clothes stood inside a fire station, admiring the engines with genuine wonder, while the chief, locked in his pride and sarcasm, saw only a distraction. Neither of them knew yet how important this encounter would become. Neither of them knew that in just a few minutes, the truth about the stranger's identity would change the atmosphere of the entire station. Chief Reynolds stood firmly in the middle of the garage, his coffee cup still in his hand. His sharp eyes were fixed on the quiet stranger who had wandered in. The chief had seen many kinds of people in his career. Reporters, school groups, curious neighbors, and sometimes even pranksters, but this man, dressed so simply and speaking so softly, didn't fit into any of those categories. Something about him irritated Reynolds, not because the man had done anything wrong, but because he seemed so calm. Too calm for the chief's liking. Reynolds was a man who valued toughness. He believed that in his station, there was no room for weakness or silence. He wanted people to speak loudly, to follow orders quickly, to move with purpose. So when he looked at this stranger, quiet and respectful, it rubbed him the wrong way. He felt the need to remind everyone in the room that he was the one in charge. With a sly smirk, the chief raised his voice. "You lost, buddy," he called out. His tone was mocking, the kind of tone that made others laugh but cut into the person it was aimed at. He didn't ask the question out of kindness. He asked it to put the man in his place. "This isn't a tour bus. We don't sell tickets for joyrides," Reynolds added, loud enough for the entire crew to hear. The garage filled with uneasy laughter. The firefighters chuckled, some more out of habit than amusement. They were used to their chief's sharp remarks, and even if the joke wasn't funny, they laughed to stay on his good side. A few of them exchanged quick glances, though, wondering if it was right to laugh at someone who had walked in peacefully, someone who hadn't shown any disrespect. The stranger, however, didn't react the way most people would. Most strangers would shrink back, maybe apologize or even leave after being mocked in front of so many. But this man simply nodded, as if the chief's words didn't touch him. His face stayed calm, his expression gentle. He gave no sign of anger or embarrassment. He just stood there quietly, as if he had expected such treatment. Chief Reynolds wasn't done. The silence from the man only fueled his sarcasm. He leaned slightly forward, his smirk growing wider. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? You planning to stand there all day? His words hung heavy in the air, cutting into the calm atmosphere the stranger had brought. The firefighters shifted uncomfortably. Some tried to keep polishing the trucks, but their ears were fixed on the exchange. The stranger still hadn't said much. He looked at the chief with steady eyes. Not challenging, not fearful, just steady. Then he nodded again, a small, almost respectful gesture, as if he didn't want to create trouble. That silence unnerved Reynolds more than any argument would have. He was used to people snapping back or making excuses. He liked winning arguments. He liked proving he was the strongest voice in the room. But this quiet man didn't fight back. He didn't even look embarrassed. His calmness almost felt like strength, though the chief didn't see it that way. The laughter in the garage died down. The men no longer found it funny. They started to realize the chief's words were harsher than usual, and the stranger's silence made it feel wrong. A rookie firefighter near the back whispered under his breath, "Why isn't he saying anything?" His voice was so low it was almost swallowed by the sound of boots moving on the concrete. Reynolds lifted his chin, determined to have the last word. "Well, if you're just here to stare, don't get in the way," he barked. He turned as if dismissing the man completely, but the stranger still didn't move. He kept his gentle eyes on the fire truck, as if the chief's words had no power over him. The moment grew heavier. The younger firefighters felt the tension building. They weren't used to seeing someone handle the chief's sarcasm like this. Usually people got flustered or defensive, but this man stood quietly, almost as though he was giving the chief space to let out his pride. It was unusual, and it made the men whisper among themselves. One firefighter muttered to another, "He doesn't look like an ordinary guy." Another nodded. "Yeah, but why is he letting the chief talk to him like that?" Their whispers grew as they tried to place the stranger's face, but the chief didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying the moment, thinking he had once again proven his authority. Reynolds laughed once more, shaking his head. He didn't realize that his words weren't funny anymore. He didn't see the discomfort on the faces of his crew. All he saw was a quiet stranger who, in his eyes, didn't belong to him. It was just another opportunity to make himself look strong in front of his men. But deep inside the garage, beneath the awkward laughter and the chief's prideful smirk, something was shifting. The stranger's calm silence was starting to feel different. It wasn't the silence of weakness. It was the silence of someone who didn't need to prove himself. The younger firefighters sensed it, even if the chief did not, and so the moment dragged on. A proud chief mocking a quiet man, a crew unsure whether to laugh or stay silent, and a stranger who held his ground without saying a word. It was a scene that would stay in their minds, not for the humor, but for the strange respect the man carried. A respect that would soon reveal who he really was. The stranger finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. He looked at the chief and then at the gleaming red engine beside him. His words were simple, without pride or arrogance. "Could I take a closer look?" he asked. "I have great respect for firefighters. You do so much for people. I'd just like to see the equipment up close if that's all right." His tone carried no demand, only genuine admiration. For a moment, the garage grew quiet. The crew paused their work, waiting for the chief's response. They could hear the sincerity in the man's request. His eyes were honest, his body language calm. He wasn't trying to take anything. He wasn't being pushy. He was simply asking with respect. But Chief Reynolds, with his arms still crossed, rolled his eyes. To Reynolds, this sounded like a waste of time. He was a man who believed the fire station wasn't a museum. It wasn't a place for strangers to wander in and play tourist in his mind. The stranger's humble tone sounded more like weakness than respect. He let out a sharp sigh and muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Wannabes always want to poke around, next thing you know. They'll be asking to wear the helmet." His words carried sarcasm that made the crew shift uncomfortably. The stranger didn't react, he didn't frown, didn't protest. He simply nodded again and kept his calm smile. "I just wanted to learn," he said softly. His voice almost disappeared in the large garage, but the men closest to him heard it. The way he spoke was so different from the chief. There was no pride, no need to prove himself. Only a simple wish to admire the tools that saved lives. One of the rookies, standing near the back, felt a strange sense of guilt. He had laughed earlier when the chief made his first joke, but now he didn't find it funny. The stranger's words reminded him of the day he first joined, When he too had looked at the equipment with wide eyes, full of respect, he whispered to the man beside him, "He's not being rude. Why's the chief so hard on him?" Chief Reynolds, however, ignored the growing discomfort. He liked to keep control of situations, and he thought mocking the stranger showed his authority. He waved a dismissive hand and muttered, "Look all you want, but don't touch. This isn't a toy shop." His voice carried a laugh that felt hollow to the crew. The stranger bowed his head slightly, as if thanking him anyway. The way he carried himself was almost unusual. Most people, when treated so coldly, would have left or argued, but this man didn't. Instead, he continued to watch quietly, stepping closer to the engine but careful not to lay a hand on it. He examined the polished ladder, the hoses coiled neatly, the metal handles shining under the lights. His eyes carried deep respect, as though he was looking at something sacred. The firefighters exchanged more whispers. They couldn't ignore the strange mix of emotions rising in the room. Part of them wanted to laugh along with the chief, just as they always did. But another part of them felt protective of the stranger. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was showing the same respect they all once had before the weight of routine dulled it. The chief crossed the floor, his boots striking the concrete loudly. He stood closer to the stranger now, his voice dropping but still dripping with sarcasm. "Respect, huh? Respect is earned. You don't get it by staring at a truck." His words cut sharper this time. The crew went silent. Even their tools stopped clinking against the metal. The stranger raised his eyes slowly, meeting the chief's glare. There was no anger in his gaze, no challenge, only a calm steadiness that made a few of the younger firefighters shift uncomfortably. He simply said, "I know that. I just wanted to see what real heroes work with." The softness of his reply made some of the crew lower their eyes, embarrassed by the chief's harshness. For a moment, no one moved. The chief stood frozen, his smirk fading just a little. He hadn't expected such a gentle answer. One of the men near the door whispered under his breath, "Why is he so calm?" Most people would have walked out by now. Another nodded. "It's like nothing bothers him." The stranger then stepped back slightly. Giving space, his respect was clear in every movement. He didn't push forward, didn't argue, didn't demand attention. He simply allowed the chief to have the power he seemed to crave. That humility, however, made the chief look smaller in the eyes of his crew. Though Reynolds himself couldn't see it, the garage felt different now. The mocking tone of the chief no longer held the same power. The firefighters, though still silent, were slowly shifting their loyalty in that moment. Not away from their chief's leadership in emergencies, but away from his pride in everyday moments. The stranger had said so little, yet his presence carried weight. The chief didn't realize it yet, but his sarcastic remarks had not broken the man's spirit. Instead, they had exposed the difference between pride and humility, between someone who demanded respect and someone who naturally carried it. The crew would remember this. They would remember how a stranger walked in, asked politely, and stayed calm in the face of mockery. And while Reynolds thought he had won by shutting the man down, the truth was that the crew was beginning to see who really held strength in that room. It wasn't the man barking orders and rolling his eyes. It was the quiet stranger who simply wanted to honor the work of firefighters. A man who gave respect even when it wasn't returned. The fire station had grown quieter after the stranger's humble request. Some of the crew members felt uneasy about how their chief had treated him, but none of them dared to speak up. Chief Reynolds still stood tall, proud of his authority, believing he had put the man in his place. Yet beneath the surface, something was shifting. The crew's attention was no longer fully on their chief. It was slowly turning toward the quiet visitor. The man stood near the engine, still silent, still respectful. He didn't argue, didn't complain. His calmness was unusual. It wasn't the calm of someone afraid, but of someone who carried patience. That made the younger firefighters curious. They began to whisper softly among themselves, careful not to be heard by the chief. One young firefighter, barely a year into the job, leaned toward his partner. "Don't you think he looks familiar?" he asked. His partner frowned, glancing again at the stranger. "Familiar how?" The rookie shrugged. "I don't know, I've seen that face before." "I'm sure of it," another firefighter, standing near the tool rack, joined in the whisper. "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. He looks like someone I've seen. Maybe in a movie." His words were barely audible, but the curiosity was spreading quickly through the crew. They tried not to stare, but their eyes kept drifting back to the man. The messy hair, the simple clothes, the calm expression. There was something about him, something that tugged at their memories. They had seen that face before, not in real life but somewhere larger. Brighter on a screen, the rookie, now more certain, pulled his phone from his pocket. He kept his movements subtle, hiding the screen from the chief with quick fingers. He typed in a name that had popped into his head. The screen lit up with images and his heart skipped a beat. He looked from the phone to the stranger and back again. His eyes widened. He nudged his partner quickly, showing him the screen. "Look," he whispered urgently. His partner's eyes widened too. His jaw nearly dropped. He glanced back at the stranger, then at the phone again. "No way," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. The photo on the screen showed a man they all knew, a man whose face was recognized worldwide. His movies had been watched by millions. His reputation went beyond the silver screen. He was known not only as a star, but as someone humble and kind, someone who treated ordinary people with respect. The rookie's hands shook slightly as he held the phone closer. He could hardly believe it. "It's him," he whispered. "It has to be him." His partner nodded. Still staring in shock. "Keanu Reeves," he said softly. The name spread quickly through the whispers of the crew, each man passing it quietly to the next, until nearly everyone in the garage had heard it. One by one, their eyes grew wider. They looked at the stranger again, this time with new awareness. It wasn't just his face they recognized now. It was the way he carried himself. The calm, the respect, the humility, it all made sense. Of course he wasn't just another passerby, he was Keanu Reeves. The whispers grew, but always under their breath. None of them wanted the chief to notice. Chief Reynolds was still standing with his arms crossed, a smirk on his face, thinking he had shut down the visitor. He had no idea that his men were realizing the truth right under his nose. The younger firefighters exchanged looks of amazement. Their thoughts raced. They couldn't believe that a Hollywood star, someone they had only seen in theaters or on TV, was standing right there in their fire station dressed like an ordinary man. Asking politely to see their equipment, one of them whispered, "Why didn't he just say who he was?" Another shook his head. "That's the point, he doesn't need to. He's not here to show off, he's here because he really respects us." That realization made their admiration grow even deeper. The chief, however, remained blind to it all. His pride wouldn't allow him to see beyond the stranger's plain clothes and quiet demeanor. While his men whispered with awe and respect, Reynolds thought he had made his point. He thought he had shown strength, but in truth he was missing everything. The rookie firefighter couldn't take his eyes off the stranger. He felt almost nervous now, standing in the same room as someone so famous, but also inspired. The man wasn't acting like a star. He wasn't demanding attention. He wasn't surrounded by cameras or assistants. He was just there, simple, quiet, and kind. That was more impressive than any movie. Slowly, the crew's attitude shifted. Where moments before they had laughed nervously at their chief's sarcasm, now they grew protective of the stranger. They respected him in a way they hadn't expected. They wanted to treat him better, to show him the same courtesy he had shown them. But they stayed silent, afraid of going against their chief openly. Still, the truth was spreading, and soon the entire crew would know. The stranger was no ordinary visitor. He was Keanu Reeves, a man whose kindness was as legendary as his films, a man who had walked into their station not as a celebrity, but as someone who admired them. And as that realization settled into their hearts, the crew felt a mix of awe and guilt. Awe because they were in the presence of someone remarkable. Guilt because their leader had mocked him without reason. The rookie slipped his phone back into his pocket. His face still pale with shock, he knew the moment would never leave him. The day they almost laughed at Keanu Reeves without realizing it. The whispers spread through the fire station like sparks catching on dry wood. One firefighter whispered to another, then another, until nearly everyone in the garage had heard the truth. Their eyes kept darting toward the quiet stranger, their hearts pounding as they realized who he really was. This wasn't just a random visitor. This wasn't some tourist looking for a thrill. The man standing in their garage was Keanu Reeves. At first, they found it hard to believe. He looked so ordinary, dressed in plain jeans and a jacket. His hair was a little messy. His shoes were worn. There were no cameras following him. No assistants carrying bags, no flashy car waiting outside. He looked like any other man passing through town. And yet, once the thought was planted, there was no denying it, it really was him. The rookie who had pulled out his phone still had it tucked in his pocket, but his mind kept replaying the image he had seen. The pictures online and the man in front of him matched perfectly. The same eyes, the same calm face, the same quiet presence. He kept glancing back at his crewmates, as if asking silently, "Are you seeing this too?" Each nod confirmed it. They all saw it now. A sense of awe swept over the crew. They couldn't believe that Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous actors in the world, was standing right there in their firehouse. And he wasn't acting like a celebrity at all. He wasn't demanding special treatment or making a big deal out of his visit. Instead, he was quiet, humble, and full of respect. That made him even more impressive in their eyes. Keanu's reputation had always been different from other stars. People admired him not just for his movies, but for his kindness. Stories about him riding the subway like an ordinary passenger, giving up his seat, helping strangers, donating quietly to charities. They had all heard those tales. And now, seeing him in person, they understood why people spoke about him that way. He carried himself with a dignity that didn't need to be loud. The chief, however, was still blind to it all. He stood with his arms crossed, his smirk unchanged. He thought he had put the stranger in his place. He didn't notice the way his men had stopped laughing. He didn't notice the way their eyes had filled with quiet recognition. He didn't realize the balance in the room was shifting. One firefighter near the back whispered, "Do you think he's here for a reason? Maybe he's filming something?" Another shook his head. "No, look at him. He's not here for publicity. He's here because he actually respects what we do." That thought spread quickly too, and the men began to see the moment differently. This wasn't just a visit, it was an honor. Keanu moved closer to the engine, still careful not to touch anything. His eyes traced the lines of the polished ladder, the coiled hoses, the shining handles. He was looking at the truck as if it was a masterpiece. His admiration was so genuine it made some of the firefighters proud. They had spent countless mornings polishing and preparing those trucks, and now someone they admired deeply was admiring their work. The garage felt different now. There was still silence, but it was no longer heavy with mockery. It was filled with quiet respect. The men no longer looked at the stranger as just another passerby. They saw him for who he really was, and that changed everything. The chief, standing proud and sarcastic, no longer looked as strong in comparison. Reynolds continued with his gruff tone, still throwing out little remarks. But the laughter he expected never came. His words fell flat, and for the first time, he noticed the silence of his crew. He frowned, confused, but brushed it off. He had no idea his men were now looking at him with disappointment instead of admiration. The rookie firefighter felt his chest tighten with excitement. He wanted to run up to Keanu to shake his hand, to tell him how much his movies had meant to him. But he stayed still, knowing it wasn't his place. Still, just the thought of standing this close to such a man filled him with pride. He knew this was a story he would carry for the rest of his life. Another firefighter whispered, "Imagine if we told people about this, no one would believe us." Keanu Reeves just walked into our fire station. His friends smirked. They'd think we were making it up. Yet they all knew, no matter what anyone outside thought. They had witnessed something rare and special. Keanu turned slightly, his eyes scanning the crew. He gave a small nod, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It wasn't the smile of a star looking for applause. It was the smile of a man grateful to be standing among people he respected. That single gesture sent a wave of warmth through the firefighters. They felt seen. They felt honored. The irony of the moment grew sharper with every passing second. While the chief mocked him, Keanu continued to show nothing but kindness and respect. While Reynolds believed he had control, it was Keanu who had quietly captured the admiration of the room. The firefighters were beginning to realize it. Even if the chief remained blind, the truth was clear now. The quiet man who had walked in so humbly, the man mocked for being too curious, was no ordinary stranger. He was Keanu Reeves, and his presence in their firehouse would soon teach them, and especially their chief, a lesson they would never forget. Chief Reynolds had always been a man of confidence. He believed that his authority in the fire station was unquestionable. His words carried weight, his presence filled the room, and he thought his sarcastic jokes made him appear stronger. For years, no one had dared to challenge him, and no one had refused to laugh at his remarks, but now, standing in front of Keanu Reeves without realizing who he was, the balance of power was quietly shifting. The whispers had already spread through the crew. Everyone but the chief knew the truth now. The man standing silently in their garage, the one being mocked, was a world-famous actor known for his humility and kindness. The firefighters exchanged glances, their respect for the stranger growing with every second. While their view of their chief was beginning to crack, Reynolds still thought he had the upper hand. He walked toward the stranger with a smug look, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. "You know," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "if you want to see what real work looks like, you should sign up. But I don't think you could handle it." His laughter was forced, and this time no one joined in. The silence hit him harder than he expected. He frowned slightly, looking around the garage. His men avoided his eyes, some pretending to stay busy, others staring at the stranger with quiet admiration. The chief didn't understand it yet, but his control over the room was slipping away. Keanu stood calmly, his expression soft and respectful. He didn't answer the chief's harsh words. Instead, he gave a small nod and said quietly, "I respect the work you do. I know it's not easy. I know it takes courage." His words weren't meant to challenge. They were meant to honor. But in the heavy silence of the room, they landed with unexpected weight. The chief shifted uncomfortably. For the first time that morning, his smirk faltered. He hadn't expected such a humble reply. His insults usually left people flustered, angry or embarrassed, but this man, this stranger, had answered with kindness instead. And that kindness made the chief's own cruelty shine brighter in everyone's eyes. One firefighter near the back muttered under his breath, "He's making the chief look small without even trying." Another nodded, whispering, "That's real strength, not all that shouting." The men weren't saying it loudly, but their hearts had already chosen who they respected more. Reynolds felt the weight of the silence pressing on him. He tried to recover, forcing a smile and clapping his hands together. "All right, enough chit-chat, back to work, gentlemen." But his voice didn't carry the same power it once did. The men obeyed, but their eyes lingered on the stranger. Their admiration was no longer for their chief, but for the quiet man who had endured mockery with dignity. The chief's chest burned with a strange mix of pride and regret. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that somehow he had misjudged the situation. He looked at the stranger again, his eyes narrowing. There was something about him that felt familiar, something he couldn't quite place, but his pride wouldn't let him ask, wouldn't let him admit he might have been wrong. Keanu didn't press the moment. He simply stood there, offering another gentle smile. His patience was remarkable. He had been mocked, dismissed, and treated poorly, yet he still showed respect. That silence, that calmness, carried more power than any loud voice in the room. It made the firefighters see him as someone extraordinary, someone who didn't need to prove his worth. The more they looked at him, the more ashamed they felt for laughing earlier. The rookie especially felt a heavy weight on his chest. He had laughed at the chief's first joke, but now he realized he had laughed at Keanu Reeves, a man who had shown nothing but humility. That guilt turned into admiration. He promised himself silently that he would never forget this lesson. The chief, however, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Insecurity for the first time. He sensed that the respect of his men was slipping away. He tried to puff out his chest, tried to act as if he was still in control. But deep inside he knew the moment wasn't his anymore. The quiet man had taken it without even trying. Reynolds cleared his throat, looking for one last chance to recover. He stepped closer to the stranger, lowering his voice. "Listen, buddy, I didn't mean anything by it. Just having a little fun." But the words sounded weak, hollow. They lacked the confidence he usually carried, and everyone in the garage could hear it. Keanu responded with the same calm tone. "I understand, it's all right. Thank you for letting me be here." His humility only made the chief's apology feel smaller. The contrast between them was clear. One man relied on sarcasm and pride to earn respect, while the other carried it naturally through kindness. The firefighters saw it plainly now. Their chief, the man they had once admired without question, had been reduced by his own arrogance. Meanwhile, the stranger, who asked for nothing and gave only respect, stood taller than anyone in the room. Reynolds felt the sting of regret. His face burned as he realized his jokes hadn't made him look strong. They had made him look petty, and worse, they had been aimed at someone who deserved nothing but respect. It was too late to undo the damage, too late to erase the words that had already been spoken. The chief swallowed hard, his pride crumbling piece by piece. For the first time in years, he realized that leadership wasn't about making others feel small. It was about showing them respect, about earning their admiration through actions. And in that moment, standing before Keanu Reeves, he knew he had failed. The firehouse was quiet, the tension heavy in the air. Chief Reynolds stood awkwardly, his pride wounded, his voice caught in his throat. The crew had seen everything. They had seen how the chief had mocked the stranger, and they had seen how the stranger had handled it with calm and respect. The silence was broken only by the soft sound of boots on the concrete as the quiet man prepared to leave. Keanu Reeves, still dressed in his simple jacket and jeans, walked slowly toward the open doors of the garage. Before he stepped out, he turned back to the firefighters. His eyes were kind, his smile gentle, and he said in that soft voice, "Thank you for what you do. Every day you put your lives at risk for others. I respect that deeply." His words carried warmth that filled the room more than any speech the chief had ever given. The crew felt their hearts stir. Some of them straightened their backs unconsciously, as if they wanted to look prouder in front of him. They knew this was not just any visitor. This was a man admired around the world, yet here he was, giving them gratitude as if they were the ones who deserved all the honor. That humility struck them harder than any movie scene. The chief's mouth opened as if to say something, but no words came. He wanted to apologize, he wanted to explain, but the weight of his pride held him back. He had spent his whole career building an image of toughness, never showing weakness, never admitting mistakes. Now, in front of his men and in front of this stranger, he found himself unable to take back the cruelty he had shown. Keanu didn't wait for an apology. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded it. Instead, he simply extended his hand. His gesture was calm, not forced, and it carried more strength than any words. After a long pause, Reynolds stepped forward and shook his hand. His grip was firm, but his heart was uneasy. For the first time, he felt smaller, not because of the stranger's fame, but because of his kindness. The crew watched closely. They saw how Keanu treated their chief with respect despite the mockery. They saw how he left with grace, without bitterness. It was a lesson none of them had expected to learn that morning. They had been taught bravery, discipline, and teamwork. But this moment showed them something else, the power of humility. As Keanu walked out of the station, his steps steady and unhurried, the firefighters exchanged glances. Some were still stunned, others smiled faintly. All of them felt a sense of pride that someone like him had chosen to visit their small firehouse. They would talk about this day for years, not as the day a celebrity appeared, but as the day they learned how true strength can come from quiet respect. Outside, the sound of the town carried on. Cars rolled down the street. Children laughed on their way home from school, and life seemed ordinary. Yet inside the firehouse, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The men looked at each other, their thoughts heavy with what they had witnessed. The rookie spoke first, his voice soft. He didn't even care that the chief mocked him, he still thanked us. Another nodded. That's what makes him different. He doesn't need to prove anything. He just is who he is. Their words echoed what everyone felt but hadn't yet said. Chief Reynolds stood quietly, his arms no longer crossed, his smirk gone. He felt the eyes of his crew on him. He knew they had seen his mistake. He knew they were comparing his sarcasm to the stranger's humility. That realization stung deeper than any fire ever had. He understood now that respect could not be forced. It had to be earned, and in that moment he realized he had much to learn. The firefighters went back to their duties, but the atmosphere was different. They worked with more focus, more quiet pride, and every so often one of them would glance at the door, as if expecting Keanu to return. His presence had left a mark. A reminder that greatness doesn't need to shout. It can whisper and still be heard by everyone. Later that evening, when the crew gathered around the table for dinner, the story spread again. The rookie recounted how he had recognized Keanu. Others shared the exact moment they realized it was him. Laughter returned to the firehouse. But this time it wasn't the nervous laughter that followed the chief's jokes. It was genuine, warm, shared among men who had experienced something unforgettable. Reynolds listened quietly, for once not adding sarcastic comments. He felt the weight of the lesson pressing down on him. He knew his men would never forget how he had mocked Keanu Reeves, and he knew they would never forget how Keanu had responded. The memory would stay with them, shaping the way they looked at respect, leadership, and humility. The story didn't end there. In the days that followed, the crew found out that Keanu often visited firehouses in secret, giving donations, offering support, never looking for recognition. It made them realize that his visit hadn't been about fame at all. It was about gratitude, about honoring the people who risk their lives for strangers every day. For Chief Reynolds, it was a turning point. He began to notice the way his men looked at him differently, not with fear, but with quiet judgment. He realized he could no longer rely on sarcasm and pride to keep their respect. If he wanted to lead them, truly lead them, he had to change, and so, the day the chief mocked a stranger became the day he learned humility. The stranger had been Keanu Reeves, a man who needed no introduction, a man who proved that true strength is found not in mocking others, but in respecting them. The crew would never forget. The chief would never forget. And the firehouse would forever carry the memory of the day their greatest lesson came not from fire, but from kindness.